All right, so I guess, does everybody want to say their name?
Sure.
Okay.
And I'm Mrs. Cody,
Okay.
the advisor.
Did you gentlemen want to ask me these questions, or you just want me to go through them and?
Introduce yourselves first.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm
I am head of photography.
I'm assistant editor.
Okay.
You'll lead us off, and then I'll pick up where you want me to.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
What do you think are some of the best perks about living in Sabattus, Maine?
The perks are the best thing about living in Sabattus. Now, because this is a historical society, are you timing this? Do you mean right at this moment? Do you mean in 1900? Do you mean in 1840? Do you mean in 1920?
I would say present day because
In the moment.
in the moment, yes.
In the
You're
moment?
Here, why?
Okay, I'm here and why?
No. You decided to live here.
Okay.
Why did you choose this town?
Okay, here's how it went with me. My mother's family went back to the middle to early 1800s, living in the town of Sabattus. My father was in the Navy, and after the war, like so many men, he got married and started a family, and they decided to make their home in Sabattus. And here I am. I never left. As of right now, it is a little harder for me because I don't want to be too negative on that question. But for me, if you're asking me personally, there aren't a lot of perks.
Now we'll roll into the historical question. Start those off.
Okay, do you want to ask me another question, or you want me to roll into something? Go
Well,
ahead.
you can roll into anything.
No,
Would you like to
that's
start it
okay.
off,
Why
then?
don't you go ahead and ask your
Yeah,
questions?
ask your
and-
question.
Ready?
What was the? Do you know what the town of Sabattus was before it was founded?
Yes, now,
Thompson Borough.
those are, those are questions, the way I answer this, and you jump in anytime you want to, of course, but I almost said this is an impossible question to answer because it's so long in this environment, because, I mean, you know, you're going back to probably,
1700s.
1780. You asked me, there is a question in there, now that I've said 1780, I think I might answer some of your questions before you asked me. But there was one question in here I remember was, when was what is the first family? And that is kind of a hard thing to pin down, but the most documented first family in town would be the Davises. And that would be right around 1780. Now, what they did in those days, you didn't buy land or anything. That was right after the American Revolution. So what would happen is that they would give land grants. They would actually give the land away, but there would be stipulations, okay? So Jesse Davis ended up owning all that land. Now that land went all the way from Bowdoin all the way down Crowley Road, okay, to what would become the old Lisbon Road. So that was a lot of land. That was thousands of acres, okay? And the stipulation, excuse me, I had an infusion and it makes me thirsty this morning, so. One of the stipulations was that Jesse had to let the stagecoach go over his land, and where the stagecoach was going over his land, he had to build the road and maintain it. He had to put in a grist mill. Now, a grist mill is where the people, I don't know if you already know, but if you don't, is where you would grind your wheat, barley, whatever you wanted to grind. This is his expertise
Corn,
here.
oats,
Yeah, he's
corn,
the guy
cinnamon.
that does this, so. He does stuff from scratch, so.
Nice.
But anyway, they had to have one of those. They had to have a tavern, and they had to have an inn in the tavern. And that would be so the people going through on the stagecoach could stay at the inn and take off on the next morning. Now, if you guys want to ask me another question, go right ahead, because,
But at that time,
Yeah.
it was an incorporated land grant. It wasn't a town per se. They didn't really have towns. But it eventually became called Thompson Borough because it was a part of Bowdoin, Lisbon, and what would become Webster, which is this area.
Yep.
But Sabattus also had several different spellings as well. He knows more about that.
yeah, yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I knew originally it was spelled with an I instead
Yeah.
of our U.
Yeah, the Indians call that area Burnt Meadows. And the Daughters of the American Revolution, the name of their club was the Burnt Meadow Chapter of the American Revolution. Go ahead, boys.
Alright, do you know if there have been any myths tied around the town, hauntings or criminal mysteries?
There we go. Now you're asking me the questions I know. Okay. The one that touches me the most, and it isn't that old, but it would be that old for you. This girl graduated from Sabattus High School. Her family is a well-known name in this town. As a matter of fact, Bucky's Field down there was given by Bucky Rancourt, and this girl, her name was Dorothy Rancourt. And she worked after she graduated from high school and had a family. She worked second shift, so she liked to do her like laundry and things like that after she got home from work, which would be 11 o'clock. So at that time, it wasn't unusual for people not to have washers and dryers in the houses, and they'd go to a laundromat. So she went to a laundromat in Lewiston, and a man was delivering papers the following day, early in the morning, delivering the Lewiston Sun, and he saw something propped up against the laundromat, which was called Beal's Laundromat. And he went over and he noticed it as probably being a human being, but he couldn't make out if it was a man or a woman. And she'd been beaten beyond all recognition with a 2x4. Now the crime was never solved, and I mentioned Dorothy first because she happened to be a friend of mine. But they do believe that the gentleman that did it is in jail right now for a very similar crime. So that's that one, okay? There was a murder that wasn't solved, and this one also, I do have a bit in it because in back of where my mother lived, and actually where I live now, was the railroad. And that part of Sabattus where the railroad was, there was a lot of land that was with coal shacks and things like that. Well, my aunt was out playing with her friends, hide and go seek, and she went to go into one of the sheds, and she found a gentleman in there that had been murdered. His name was Mr. Alexander. She knew him. I mean, he was a common man in town. As a matter of fact, he was somewhat prominent. That case was never solved. They never knew who did it. What they were thinking is it was probably a hobo or something, killed him, trying to rob him, then probably jumped the train and headed for Bangor, or Canada even. So that is that one. There's one other one, and it's Jack. Now, is everybody with me, and you want me to quit?
We're with you.
Okay.
Oh, you
You
could
sure?
never bore me. I'm a
Oh,
history
okay,
person.
okay, that's good. Because as long as one person listen, I'll keep going.
You could never bore me.
There is, and this is again with the where the trains are. This gentleman's name was Jack, and he was a notorious hobo traveling back and forth between Bangor, Portland, Boston, through Sabattus. So that's the way the train went. So he wore what was called at the time a long soldier's coat. And they had him in the Civil War, and some of them were leather and some of them were wool. He always wore a tricorner hat, and he always wore black boots. And they found him. What they used to do is they used to store a lot of stuff, like I said, the coal and stuff, and they used to stack the railroad ties, and the bums could crawl down inside the railroad ties. They'd have a small fire or whatever in there, and then they jumped the train to go wherever they were going. But down inside of there, they found Jack. He was dead. So the story goes that you can see Jack goes up and down walking that track because he's looking for where the train is. Now, when I was a little kid, myself and some of my friends, we were up catching fireflies, and we looked, and it was getting kind of misty. It was a hot night, but it was getting kind of misty. And we saw somebody walking down the road, and we swear to God that it was Jack. Okay? Because he had that tri hat on, and you couldn't see his jacket and his boots good, but he was very tall and slender. And he was saying, "Where the heck's that train?" The word he used wasn't heck, but I won't use the real word that he used. Now, whether it was just little kids fantasizing in their minds that they saw what they really didn't see, I don't know. But to this day, I tell everybody I saw Jack. Okay, so that's it. Is that okay? Does that answer your question all right? Okay. Go ahead, guys.
Do you know why the school system, why Sabattus' school system didn't merge?
Like into the Lewiston one?
Yes.
Because we were reading about that.
I know, yeah. That is somewhat of a hard question because the vote about the merger got very personal. It went, I mean, there were rational reasons why to merger, but besides that, you know, there was a lot of people that just, you know, why did Sabattus want to become a part of Lewiston? And I'm kind of stuttering here because I don't want to offend anybody, but the basic reason was for the educational system because Sabattus was going to need a new high school. Now, I always felt, and here's why I've been tiptoeing around, if they'd have built it in 1950 when they started realizing they really needed it, I think they would have been better off. And my reasoning is, I think when a town loses its high school, it loses its identity. But that's only my personal opinion, okay? So you guys can just void that out of your heads if you want to. Also at that time, there was a lot of talk of sewer systems and water systems, and this is where Mr. Curran comes in because he had a large amount to do with the current water district. I mean, Leo did really a lot on that. If you were talking why, and this is something else I want to roll into, if you were talking why to, you know, the merge with Lewiston, I mean, if you studied on that, and that was in the 1960s, I take it is what you're talking about. I think it was the early 60s, actually. But in general, I want to tell you at the beginning, and this is written, this is history, that Sabattus, industrial and everything, was way ahead of Lewiston. Our mills would get contracts that Lewiston couldn't dream of getting because the quality was so much better in Sabattus. And I'll tell you what else Sabattus had, and I do have it written down here. We had 4 mills. We had a very large school system because of all the one-room schools. Many of the students of Lewiston, we had to educate them, okay, in our schools. Our sports were much better. Our high school teams used to play college teams and beat them regularly. There was a lot of entertainment in this town. They had movie houses. We had opera houses. Something else I noticed you guys didn't question at all. At Martin's Point, they had a full-sized softball field. They had a full playground. There was a steamboat that would give rides at night all the way around the lake. And people from Lewiston, by the hundreds, on hot days in the summer, on regular work days, not the weekend, would leave work, pick up their families, picnic lunch, and head to Sabattus on the trolley, okay? And there would literally be 500 people at Martin's Point. Now, Long Beach was the same way. Also in town, we had restaurants, okay? There were 3 doctors. There were 2 attorneys. There was a drugstore and a druggist. There was 4 grocery stores, a shoe store, a clothing store, of fine linen and jewelry. We had our own post office. There was grist mills, sawmills. There were taverns and inns. And, you know, we had it all. So you asked the question, well, why did Lewiston become so large and Sabattus stayed as a small town? The Great Falls. If you go from Lewiston to Auburn, you see the Great Falls. They had the power. Now, when they got all that power on the river, how were they going to transfer that power into the city? Well, something else happened. There was a famine in Europe, and especially Irish from Ireland were starving to death. They got those people to come over here, along with some Italians, and they dug all those canals, pick and shovel. No heavy equipment. They dug them all by pick and shovel, and they had all these men. So because they had that power is why they could have the size mills they had, which is the Bates Mill, Hill Mills, and some of those big brick buildings, you see. So that's my answer to that question.
If we were to go online to find more information, do you have any sites that you would recommend?
I do. I'll tell you what I have, and then we'll go to Jason because he has some too. And one source of information, and Jason and I are trying to be the ones adding to this as much as we can, is the Sabattus Historical Society. Now, we have a Facebook page, and I try to continually put things that I think people would like to read about on that Facebook page. We also have a YouTube page, is the Androscoggin County Registry of Deeds, the archives. And from here, I'm going to give it to him.
I like the Library of Congress. It's good because you can put your search terms in there for whatever you're looking for. And one thing Mike has found that he gets much more hits, if you will, by using alternative spellings to Sabattus.
So the only two I would get from there would have to be Webster and Sabattus, Sabattis, because the village where I live was actually Sabattusville. And the whole town, as Jason just said, but the whole town was Webster. Okay. Does that make a little bit of sense? Yeah.
I was just curious if you guys knew, one of the things that when our students were researching for the Elizabeth story, they saw something about the idea about Chief Sabattus's remains.
Supposedly he was killed at the top of the lake. That's the Chief Sabattus. And they buried him at the top of the lake. Now, Devil's Den still exists up there. My brother's been in it in probably the 1970s. It's a small cave up there, and I don't know if you've heard the story on it, but some hunters were chasing a bear, and the bear went in, and the dog went in after them. They thought they lost their dog. Well, as they're walking down the mountain, the dog came out on the other side of the mountain. So the story is, it must go all through the mountain. And then if you go on Maine Geological Survey, they'll tell you all about the mountain, what it's made of. It's really heavy in iron content, which stands aside from all the surrounding areas. And all around we have sand pit gravel pits. And it's a very geologically unique area we live in this town. And with the old railroad, I know you like railroads, the old railroad always came through Sabattus. That was the main thorough rail section, was right through Sabattus Village. And there was a president, and I don't know which one it was.
Roosevelt?
Mike would know.
It escapes me.
I thought it was Teddy Roosevelt. He was on
It
the
could have
trolley.
been.
Could have been.
And he went up, and which is now Main Street Market. It used to have a big turret up there, and he gave a speech from that while he was waiting, while they were doing whatever they did to the trolley. He was heading to Augusta for a meeting or something with whomever governed at the time.
Pretty sure it would be Theodore Roosevelt.
Well, that's why I said it was right around the same time as Taft, which
Yeah.
would be Theodore Roosevelt. You're right. You probably are right. There may have been more than one, too, because I even think Truman came through one time on it, yeah. But that would have been later on, of course. All right, go ahead.
Do you prefer living like now or back in your childhood?
Back in my childhood. Absolutely. I cannot explain to you how this town was back in my childhood. It was Mayberry RFT, you know? That probably doesn't tell them. They're looking at me as if they're going,
It's 1964, Mike.
Go ahead.
For how the town is now, what is something that you would bring back, or some perks that we have now that we didn't have earlier?
Okay. Well, you know, there's one thing, I'll start at the hardest thing to say. This is a bad way to say it, but the thing I wish we had is a thing I can't explain. When I'm talking to somebody that's from my era, and we're talking about being little boys in Sabattus, Maine, there was a feeling. And you know how hard it is to explain to somebody how you're feeling at any given moment? There was, you could call it a sense of community, you know, you could call it whatever you wanted to call it, but we all had this feeling, you know, and you knew everybody in town. I mean, I always give, you're gonna think that I'm just tied into dead people, but I always give in the thing that's like, when I used to walk into the post office, there was an old coffee that was called Chock full of Nuts. They probably still have it, I don't know. But you'd walk in and you'd see this can there that was chock full of nuts. And then you'd know that somebody had passed away. Because everybody, of course, would come into the post office for their mail. So the postmistress would put that out there when somebody had passed away. And the people would put money in there. And they'd sign the book. And then the she's called postmaster, but it was a woman, and she would buy flowers, and with the extra money, she would give it to the family. So, I don't know if you did, it was almost a quaint thing, even though it was something real sad happening to a family, it was so neat for that family to know that the whole community wanted to give to them, you know? And I have that one from my grandfather, and there was over 250 people at that time who signed the book that gave money in that can for my grandfather.
That's crazy. That's more of a connection.
You know, so that is kind of one of the things.
I have another question. What
Sure.
was it like watching like the change of Sabattus? Like how?
You know, when Sabattus really started changing in my personal life, I was just starting out with my family. I was finishing up college at night, and I don't know if this was wise or not, but my children are I have 3 and they're only 2 years apart, so that keeps you pretty busy. We was living in a 38 by 8 foot trailer, and I used to go out and study in my car. So I was really caught up with that, but that is when the farmers were really having a hard time to make any money. And they started subdividing their land, and in short, Sabattus became just a bedroom community. We had no longer had an industrial base for our taxes or anything like that. It was just, it was just a personal property. Was the base of the taxes.
Get some more questions?
Just personal one from me. When was
Yeah.
Sabattus it's as a manufacturing making thing city? What year was that made the manufacturing prime? When did it make the most things?
During the war, probably in 1915.
I was going to say 19. Well, it's the 1920s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
World War I
Yeah,
was in
yeah.
1917.
Yeah,
They had
yeah.
contracts to make wool
Yeah.
overcoats.
Yeah, yeah, and
Because there-
everything.
there
Yeah,
was
that would have been it.
There was a lot of sheep herders in Maine at that time, in the
Right.
late 19th century. And
Right,
they would bring it down by rail,
Yeah.
and they would, in the linen shops would meet them.
yeah. That's
Government
that's another question I didn't see. And I'm not questioning those questions. It's just, I like that I had those because now I can see what you're thinking. You know what I mean? As can be, I keep saying I'm 75. Well, I am an old man. Is really about the mills and the lake, because, you know, the lake wasn't always there. You know, that lake, it's just a dead river that starts in, somewhere around Leeds, Maine. And it came down through there, and that was all marshy meadow. Yes, there was some pools of water and stuff, but we have a lot of stuff on Martin's Point.
Yeah.
That was
It's one of our prime
yeah.
interests is Marcus
Yeah,
Point.
yeah. Long Beach, the trolley,
You
the
could go another
train.
10 minutes if-
Yeah, the trolley, the train, the
Pardon
lake,
me?
the
You could go another
farms.
10 minutes if-
I think, you know, there's some things that shouldn't go forgotten, like the American Legion Post is called the Harry J. Conway. Harry J. Conway was the only boy from Sabattus that was killed in action in the First World War. You know, then there's that old thing on the 11th day in the 11th month when they signed the armistice. Unfortunately, Harry J. Conway was killed on the 8th of November. The armistice was signed on the 11th. So 3 days before the end of the war. I think one of the proudest moments, and I couldn't tell this story, is because there was a time of assimilation when there was people that moved into this area who didn't speak the language, they didn't have the same religion, and they were from a different socioeconomic situation, and yet the town of Sabattus took them in. Was there any problems? Yes, there were. There always is. You know, human beings, when there's something different, they get panicky. But Sabattus did so much better than any of the towns or cities around in acclimating those people.
Very inclusive.
Yeah, they went so far as to even let them have a religious service in the town school. So I would ask anybody here if they wanted to do a one-on-one or anything. Oh, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I would also say, there's no age limit on belonging to the Historical Society. If somebody wanted to have a project,
I'm the young guy.
yeah, he's,
Oh,
I called him,
you know, my reverend
he and my
son,
son
I'm
are
the
best
token
friends, they
younger
went to
son.
school from the get-go, you know?
Cool.
But yeah, we can't go into that, because that would be kind of, there would be.
One interesting thing, I know this is the newspaper, correct? Okay. When I was just a youngin' in the 1970s at the church in Sabattus, they used to print up their own pamphlets, leaflets for the service, or whatever it was. And they had an actual hand crank printing press that at that time, the 1970s, it was an antique. I actually have done this. You take the typeset, which is you put the letters in, and you put them on a
Something
blot.
like that.
And you had an ink pad blotter, and you blot it, and then you feed the papers in and actually print off your newspapers like that, so.
Something like that.
I mean, this is
I
like,
have them take the
this Ben
little
Franklin type
stampers
stuff.
and
Yeah.
try to just translate what was in the newspaper.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
using the individual
You
stampers.
think that every those, you know, they had some words, but the common words, they would have words for them, but the majority of them, you would literally have to sit there painstakingly, put all the letters in, so. And it's really interesting. Very time consuming.
We are gonna have a video coming up, and I'm gonna mention to Jason, we're gonna probably do it in June, because that's the anniversary of the C-47 flying boxcar that crashed into the town.
It's a
Okay.
large military plane.
Yeah, large
Crashing
military.
on the fields.
At that time, it was the biggest one they had.
Yeah.
And it crashed just, you probably know that, crashed right down near my back.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
it went right over his great-grandfather's
Farm.
farm.
Well, we get big planes over there all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
well, because he was in.
And
my
this was
grandfather-
in 1965.
Yeah. I have a whole scrapbook of a farmer who almost got hit by the plane. So he's
Yeah.
a personal friend of mine, so
Right.
very
Wow, we'll have to
interesting.
look for
Yeah.
that.
He was out haying his field, and he saw the plane come, and he backed his tractor up, and the plane crashed.
Talk about Martin's Point that you had wanted to share. It sounds like you had a lot of.
I don't know, it's
Something
quite a story.
interesting,
We could give a brief thing, I know I'm watching time here, we're getting close here for you, but there used to be a plaque on the boulder down there when I was a kid. It was a bronze plaque, and it was stolen, we don't even know when it was stolen, most likely in the 90s, maybe late 80s, the 90s, somewhere in that area. And no one knew what was on the plaque, because, I mean, I remember it, and it was just a dedication. It was some names. We didn't know it. It wasn't like Here Lie Ye Rock or nothing elaborate or interesting like that. But it was just a dedication rock. Well, a month ago, Mike found it by going through the archives of the Lewiston Sun, and it wasn't the Sun Journal, it was for the Evening Journal.
It was the Lewiston Journal.
Yeah, it's different, it's 3 different names, but painstakingly going through from year to year to year, you know, not search words, search engines, just going through and finding it.
Where was it
Random.
discovered?
He found it.
Where was it?
It was the journal once a week had a magazine section set into it, and it would have major stories, and it was the whole. It wasn't just about that rock. I just ran into that. It was part of it, you know, but it was the whole story of Martin's.
The
of
people
Martin's Point.
that owned the property were watching all the camps and cottages being built up, and they owned the park, you know, Marks Point. And they didn't want to see that get all subdivided and, in their opinion, ruined, because they had a great view of Sabattus Mountain and that nice area. So they donated it to the town, well, the children did, after their parents' death. And on the stipulation that they put a plaque up that bear their parents' names. So we had it, and it was Joe Martin.
He gives me credit for finding it, and I did, but he went through a whole bunch of town reports to come up with the name and verification of Martin, so that we could definitely chase it down, you know, through that name too. So he and I have had a lot of fun with this, working together, and like I say, he liked to grow his own wheat and then create his own breads out of the stuff he's grown.
That's awesome.
But I'm afraid now he's getting a little
Getting along in the
weak in the knee, and he has a few problems, but anyway.
We thank you all for letting us come in.
This has definitely been